Hey everyone, we made it to Parshat Kedoshim. And Parshat Kedoshim speaks about one of the most important topics of the Torah, which is Kedusha, holiness. Right? The opening Rashi of the Torah tells us that as opposed to other aspects of the Torah, that when Moshe was teaching them to the people, only part of the nation needed to be present. When it comes to Parshat Kedoshim, the entirety of Am Yisrael needed to be present in order for Moshe to teach it. Why Rashi says, Mipnei sherov gufei Torah tuliba. Because all the essentials of the Torah are dependent on Parshat Kedoshim, right? All the A-list of mitzvos are found in Parshat Kedoshim because this teaches like the most important principles and the most important values. When we look throughout the Parsha, and we look throughout all the mitzvot, so some of the mitzvot, it's super obvious why these mitzvot were picked to be on the A-list. But when it comes to other mitzvot in this week's Parsha, it's not as clear. And we have to ask ourselves the question and do much more of the legwork to figure out why is it that these mitzvot are so important that Hashem picked them to be in Parshat Kedoshim. So one of those mitzvot is the mitzvah of Orla. Right, if we look in beginning of Shlishi, in Parak Yotet Pasuk Kaf Gimel, so the Torah tells us, when you enter the land of Israel and you plant a fruit tree, how are you supposed to treat this fruit tree halachically? It's supposed to be treated like orla, like this blockage, something you're supposed to separate yourself from. So how is that manifested? The Torah says, Shalosh shanim yiyelachem arelim lo ye'achel. The first 3 years of the fruit tree, you're not supposed to eat the fruit. Okay, the Torah continues, and what happens in the 4th year? Does the fruit suddenly become permitted? So no, sort of. It's complicated. The Torah says, all the fruit is supposed to be treated as holy. This is called netar avai, meaning in the 4th year, the fruit is permitted to be eaten, but since it's holy, it can only be eaten in Yerushalayim, and you have to bring the 4th year fruit up to Yerushalayim and eat it there. And then the Torah concludes, 5th year and on, fruit becomes totally permissible to eat wherever you want. Right, so just to summarize, the first 3 years, the fruit is orla, you can't eat it anywhere. The 4th year, the fruit is netar avai, it's kodesh, it's holy, and you can only eat it in Yerushalayim. And the 5th year and on, the fruit can be eaten wherever you want. And we have 2 questions. Number 1, the question is why? What's the reason behind all these details? And question number 2, and more importantly, is why is this mitzvah found in Parshat Kedoshim? Why is this considered one of the cream of the crop, one of the mitzvah that has to be on the Torah's A-list of mitzvah? So in order to answer the first question, what's going on in this mitzvah? We look at a lot of the mafarshim, a lot of the commentaries. And in order to explain this mitzvah of netar avai, right, of why the 4th year fruit is considered holy and only needs to be eaten in Yerushalayim, so a lot of the commentaries agree with this premise that the fruit of the 4th year is considered the tastiest of the fruit. That's when the fruit is at its sweetest, right? The first 3 years, the fruit was a little immature and needed time to develop, to germinate a little bit. By the time we got to the 4th year, the fruit is at its best, and therefore, it's supposed to take the best fruit up to Yerushalayim. But the question is why? So the Ramban says something that would probably be our first gut instinct. That we want to take the best fruit up to Yerushalayim because we want to serve God with the best of what we got. We wait 3 years because the fruit isn't good at first, and then at the first possible opportunity where the fruit is at its best, i.e. the 4th year, we take that fruit and bring the best to Yerushalayim. The same way when it comes to the mitzvah of Bikurim. The first year we have to bring, every year we have to bring the first of our fruit up to God as a way of giving God the best. Or back in Parsha Bereshit, right, when it came to Cain and Hevel, Cain was punished because he gave God the worst of his sheep, the worst of his flock as a gift, as opposed to Hevel, who gave the best of his crop to God. That's why Hevel was rewarded. We're supposed to give the best of what we got to God, and the Ramban says, since the fruit of the 4th year is the best fruit, we have to give the best of what we got to God. That's one approach. The Sefer HaChinuch has a different approach. The Sefer HaChinuch agrees to this premise that the 4th year fruit is the best fruit, the tastiest fruit, the sweetest fruit, but he gives a different explanation for why we're giving the best of our fruit to God. The Sefer HaChinuch says, and I quote, "Sheratza hakel liyot ha'adam mitorer lahalel Hashem baruch hu b'tchilat mivchar peril tilanotav." That we want to give God the best of our fruit because that's somehow going to awaken us to do a better job serving God. Somehow by us giving God the best of our fruit, then we're going to do a better job in Avodas Hashem in service of God in the future. And the question is why? I want to put this question to the side for a second, and I want to do something that I don't normally do in Divrei Torah, which is read a paragraph from an article. Yesterday, on Rosh Chodesh Iyar, on Aleph Iyar, was the Yortzeit of Rav Aaron Lichtenstein. And as many of you know, I spent 2 years learning in Yeshivat Har Etzion, learning in the Gush, of which Rav Aaron Lichtenstein was one of the founding Rosh Yeshiva, and Rav Aaron Lichtenstein was this massive Gadol Batorah, not just in the sense that he was an incredible, massive Talmud Chacham, but in the sense that every aspect of his life was an embodiment of service, of Avodat Hashem, and like, all the stories we hear about him, it's just like his intensity, and every single like breathing moment of his existence was about service of God, and he was someone who was incredible to learn from. So it was his yahrzeit yesterday, and I was looking through some eulogies, some hespedim that a lot of his students gave about him when he passed away 9 years ago in 2015, just to understand a little bit more about him, just to supplement all the stories I've heard about him already. And I stumbled across a eulogy, a hesped written by Rav Shalom Karmi, one of his students. Rav Karmi teaches Tanakh, has been teaching Tanakh in YU for the past 50 years. And he had one paragraph when he spoke about Rav Aaron that really stood out to me, and I'm going to read it to you now. Rav Karmi says the following. Earlier in my time at yeshiva, I made my commitment to orthodoxy, to Yirat Shamayim, to religious truth. In my mind, I was opting for a sacrificial path. I had chosen duty over inclination, truth over happiness. Rav Lichtenstein valued truth. He knew that spiritual growth is impossible without Yisurim, tribulations. Nonetheless, he thought I was drawing the contrast between Avodah Lishma, service for its own sake, and having a happy life more starkly than needed. He thought that inclination and duty should coincide, and the predominant mood of Avodat Hashem ought to be an inexhaustible sense of joy and accomplishment. Essentially, what Rav Karmi is saying that Rav Aaron valued and believed is that Avodat Hashem is not something that's supposed to be negative. Overall, there's supposed to be this positive association between service of God and sweetness and happiness, right? It's this idea that a lot of schools have when they give their kid their first chumash, that they put a little bit of honey on top, and the kid licks up the honey. So there's this sweet association that they always have with Torah. And essentially, Rav Aaron is not tuning down the fact that living a life of Avodas Hashem is hard, right? There are definitely yisurim, there are definitely difficulties that come along the way. But at the end of the day, the big picture should be that the goal and our general attitude towards Avodas Hashem is positive. And I think this is what the Sefer HaChinuch is getting at. Right? The Sefer HaChinuch is saying, when we take the best of what we got, the sweetest of our fruit, and we bring that up to Yerushalayim, and we eat it in Yerushalayim, we're creating this positive association, this positive link in our mind between sweetness and Avodas Hashem. And we're recognizing that even though a lot of the details of Avodas Hashem may be difficult, at the end of the day, big picture, we want to have this overall, just this simple, pure sweetness and happiness that's connected to Avodas Hashem. That answers our first question, what's going on in the mitzvah of Orla? But why is this so important that it's found in Parshat Kedoshim? Well, this isn't just one of the important mitzvahs found in Parshat Kedoshim. It seems to embody what Parshat Kedoshim is all about. Right, the Ramban famously, in the beginning of the Parsha, when he's explaining what does it mean, Kedoshim Yiyu, to be holy, the Ramban tells us, don't be a naval b'rshut haTorah. A naval is this disgusting person who exists within the realm of the Torah. Essentially, a naval b'rshut haTorah, the Ramban tells us, is someone who looks at all the technical details of the Torah and treats it like a checklist. And if something is technically not allowed, this guy doesn't do it because he's really from. But if something is technically is allowed, then even if it's not within the values of the Torah, he's still going to do it. So let's say gorging yourself and eating tons of meat and tons of wine. That's not technically prohibited by the Torah. So Naval B'Rshut the Torah is going to say it's not prohibited, therefore I'm going to do it. But the Ramban says the commandment of Kedoshim Tiyu, which begins the Parsha, to be holy, is essentially telling us not to do that. To not treat the Torah like this checklist. And if we're doing all the things the Torah says, but nothing more, then we're considered good people. But rather, we should treat all the mitzvot of the Torah as connect the dots, as my Rebbe, Rav Tzvi Kaya, always says. Right? That the goal of the Torah is to give us all the bullet points, and we're supposed to connect the dots and be able to see the bigger picture. So if gorging yourself on meat and wine clearly isn't within the values of the Torah, even if there's no explicit prohibition, we still should refrain from it. And essentially, this changing this mindset of treating the Torah like a checklist to this overall big picture is essentially this idea of moving away from the details and understanding the Torah from bird's eye view. The details can sometimes be overwhelming. The details can sometimes be this heavyweight and sometimes be not so great and not so positive. And that's true. And Rav Aaron acknowledged that in his life, that sometimes Avodas Hashem has a lot of Yisurim, and it's not always going to be an easy ride. But the goal of having these difficulties in Avodas Hashem is not because Hashem wants us to have a difficult life. But a lot of times you need to sacrifice a little bit in order to benefit from the big picture, right? The goal at the end of the day is we have to go through some difficult things and to work a little hard in order to achieve this overall picture of Kedusha, of being closer to God, of living a life of holiness. That's what Parshat Kedoshim is all about. It's understanding that it's more than just the details, but there's this bigger picture that's involved, and essentially that's what's going on in the mitzvah of Orla. we're understanding that Avodat Hashem, at the end of the day, there's supposed to be just this pure, simple sweetness that's associated with Avodat Hashem. And sometimes it's going to be difficult for us to understand that along the way. Sometimes it's going to be 3 years of waiting, of having to sacrifice and not eat the fruit, but it's going to be worth it to go through the details, to go through the Yisurim, even if they're difficult, because we're getting to this positive place of Avodat Hashem, of sweetness and happiness and connection to our service of God. And hopefully, and because this is a bracha I'm going to give to everyone, I'm going to give to myself, that we never have to feel like we're sacrificing on our life, on our happiness in order to serve God, because the two go hand in hand. And sometimes it's going to be a little bit hard to realize that right away, but hopefully we get to this point where when we understand that Kedoshim to you, of living a life of holiness, is actually a positive thing. It's this bracha, it's this incredible opportunity given to us by God. We should be super, super appreciative of it and try to find that happiness and that sweetness and that tastiness in our daily service of God, and because that's really what it's all about. Okay, have a great Shabbos. Bye-bye.